Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, part of the Weirding Way Media Network.
80s TV ladies, so sexy and so pretty. 80s TV ladies, stepping out into the city. 80s TV ladies, often treated kind of working hard for the money in a man's world. 80s TV ladies.
Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, the pop culture podcast where we look at female-driven television shows from the 1980s with your hosts, Susan Lambert-Haddam and Sharon Johnson.
Hello, I'm Sharon.
And I'm Susan, and today we'll be talking about designing women with our very special guest and friend, Maggie Friedman. A few of our listeners suggested this show, Designing Women, but really, this is a Sharon pick.
It sure is. This is one of the shows that I thought of when we first started talking about doing this podcast. Designing Women is a sitcom that aired on CBS for 7 seasons, 1986 to 1992.
A light workplace and family comedy that looked at the lives of 4 women and 1 man working at Sugarbaker Associates, an interior design firm in Atlanta, Georgia.
It starred Delta Burke, Dixie Carter, Annie Potts, Jean Smart, and Meshach Taylor.
Delta Burke and Dixie Carter play sisters. Dixie plays the recently widowed fire-tongued matriarch Julia Sugarbaker. Delta Burke plays Suzanne Sugarbaker, Julia's spoiled younger sister and thrice-divorced ex-beauty queen. Mary Jo is their neighbor and interior designer, played by Annie Potts. She's single mom. She's divorced. She's a little bit nervous. Charlene is the office manager and friend. They all have a financial investment in the business.
And there was a reunion special in 2003.
There is a lot to talk about today, so let us introduce our special guest, Maggie Friedman. Maggie is a phenomenal writer, producer, and showrunner and friend.
She got her start writing television on Wasteland in 1999, a short-lived Kevin Williamson show. She went on to work on shows like Once and Again, Dawson's Creek, and Jack and Bobby, a show which I loved and unfortunately only lasted about 12 episodes.
Maggie has created and is showrunner of several shows, including Witches of East End and most recently Firefly Lane, starring Katherine Heigl and Sarah Chalk.
Welcome to the show, Maggie.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here.
I'm so glad to have you here and to be talking about designing women. But before we really dive in, we need to know what designing women characters we each are.
Oh.
Are you a Julia, a Suzanne, a Mary Jo, or a Charlene?
I would like to think that I'm a Julia. I would always find myself watching the show and going, yes, that's exactly it. But I don't know that I have or had Julia's ability to speak up for herself in the way that she did and say what she meant. So I'll just call myself a Julia wannabe.
I think you're a Julia, for sure.
Oh, I don't say nearly half the things that come to my
No, but you know what?
mind.
Again, television is a fantasy version of ourselves, right? So you can be Julia. You're like a real life Julia. Even if you say half of what Julia says in that show, then you're really a Julia. But, because I think most of us say about, a 20th of what characters say on television.
I'll take that.
Okay.
So which character are you?
All right. So I think I'm Mary Jo because Annie Potts is the bomb.
Yeah.
I totally always sort of gravitated to her on the show. And because the character is like a little naive, but also kind of smart and bitter and sarcastic. But I dressed more like Anthony in the 80s. And in an interior design firm, I would not have been anything other than like hauling stuff. So in some ways, I'm a little bit the driving assistant who was just schlepping things back and forth. In the 80s, you would not have put me into an interior design firm in the South. All right, Maggie.
I'm a Mary Jo too. Harried, single mom, neurotic, not quite together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But I don't know, because you're also so very smart.
Oh, thank you.
And Mary Jo is smart.
Mm-hmm. She is smart. Yes. And she's, I think when it comes down to it, she's got some really great speeches that she makes in that. I had remembered, rewatching all these episodes, I had remembered them all belonging to Julia. But Mary Jo steps up to the plate a few times in a great way. But it feels like a lot of times she's not that sure of herself. She's a little anxious, and I identify with that.
She's kind of a Julia in training.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good way to
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with, her ex-husband. She put him through medical
Yes.
school, and then he dumps her.
Yes.
But she chooses to walk away from the marriage without taking anything from him. She wants to stand on her own 2 feet. So I think that says a lot about
She's
her
very
strength.
independent.
Yes.
Yeah. And she cares so much about her kids, and she cares so much about her friends, but she's also a little neurotic. So
All right. Yeah. I think you're Mary Jo.
I feel like a Mary Jo.
Melissa, do you remember the show?
Oh, I just watched it. I
And-
watched the first season,
And
pilot and first season.
what Designing Women are you?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, which one do you think you're most like? Because I feel like I have pieces of all of them in me. We probably all do,
Yeah.
but Julia
In the
is what I
80s,
aspire
Which
to.
one in the 80s, which one were you most like?
I guess I would have been more like Annie Potts too.
Yeah.
Although, I don't know.
What? Come
I don't
on.
identify with any of them.
All right. Well, we're going to get to that. Okay. All right. We're going to
Sitting in my little corner.
we're going to tuck Melissa back in her corner because we're going to come back to that. All right. So we're going to dive further into Design Women, but I want to start a little so that the listeners, did I just say viewers? Listeners know a little bit about you.
Okay.
How did you get started in television?
Well, I grew up watching way too much television in the 80s and the 90s. And I thought I was going to be a novelist. That's what I always wanted to write. And I really wanted to, when I was like 12, I aspired to be Jackie Collins or Danielle Steele someday.
Now, were you reading those books?
Oh, yeah. I was reading them. Yeah. And then, like, when I was like 13 or 14, I read Less Than Zero. And so I wanted to be Bret Easton Ellis. And, like, my goal was I was going to publish a novel while I was still in college, because that's what Bret Easton Ellis did. And on the back of that book, it said, in the blurb, the author blurb, it said, Bret Easton Ellis is a student at Bennington College. And I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It didn't happen. So I forever felt like a failure because I didn't, but whatever, it's fine. And then, so I wanted to write books. And then I ended up taking a women filmmakers class in college. And I realized I always loved TV and movies, but I just didn't think of it as a thing that I could do. And then when I took that women filmmakers class, I was like, oh. And so then I got really interested in making movies. And I went to AFI.
So where did you go to college?
I bounced around. I was at Bard. I went to the New School for a while and took a 16 millimeter filmmaking course there, and I made my own short film, and I did all of it. I was a cinematographer. I was in it. I edited it on a flatbed, and so then I met this woman who was a student at AFI. And she told me about it. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I want to go there. And she said, you'll never get in. And so then I was like, well, I have to go there now.
Yeah. Was she being a mean girl, or was she
was being a mean girl.
Oh.
Yeah. So, whatever. It's fine.
Yeah. Where is she now?
I don't know. But so then I applied to AFI and I got in, thank God.
Yeah.
And so I went there and studied screenwriting. And even still, like, I thought, this was in like the late 90s. I thought, I'm going to write movies. So I wrote a script while I was there that ended up like winning an award at graduation. And that got kind of me a little bit of like, oh, I met a manager who's still my manager today. And
It's a lovely Hollywood.
yeah, he introduced me to an agent who's still my agent today. And she said, I think you have a voice that could work on television. And it had not occurred to me to write television at that point, even though I was raised on TV. But then I wasn't really watching a lot of TV, like in the late 90s. So she gave me, this was in like 1999, she gave me a bunch of videotapes of the hit shows at the time. And she said, write a spec of one of these. And so I chose Ally McBeal.
Oh,
And I
nice.
wrote a spec Ally McBeal, and then I had my little feature script, which I did end up selling eventually, but it never got made. But anyway, that got me a job on a Kevin Williamson show. This was after the success of Dawson's Creek was already on. He made another show called Wasteland, and it was on ABC very briefly. But that was my first job, sort of straight out of film school, and it was amazing. And then that got canceled very quickly. We made 13 episodes. And
But I don't think all of them aired.
they didn't. I don't think they, although I think they may have burned
They
it
may
off
have.
in the summer.
Okay.
I don't remember now. Yeah, it's a blur. But then I ended up jumping over to Dawson's Creek when that got canceled. That was in season 3 of Dawson's, like midway through. And I stayed there for a few years, and that was great.
I mean, and what a show to both shows to start on. You
Yeah.
get sort of both sides of like
I know.
a show that sort of gets killed almost before it's begun, and then a show that is on fire.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so cool. Beloved. Okay, so after Dawson's,
Uh-huh.
then what happens?
Well, so I was on Dawson's for a couple years, and then I got an offer to go write on a show called Once and Again, which was a Zwick Herskovitz show, the guys who
Yeah,
did
yeah.
30-something. And Greg was running Dawson's at the time, Greg Berlanti, and he very kindly let me go right on Once and Again because he was a huge Zwick Herskovitz fan. And so I went over there and I got to work with Winnie Holtzman, who,
I love
Yeah.
her.
I mean, come on. She's amazing. She created My So-Called Life. She wrote the play Wicked.
Yes.
And she was actually writing Wicked at the time. So I got to witness a little bit of how that show came together. And I got to go to a stage reading very early on. It was just like in a room at Disney, and Kristen Chenoweth was there and Idina Menzel, and they were singing, around the table. It was insane. But, and I actually just had lunch with Winnie about a week ago. I went over to her house, and her husband, Paul Dooley, was there. He's like legendary Paul Dooley. He gave me a signed copy of this book that he just wrote about his life, which is amazing. But their daughter, Savannah, who at the time when I was writing on Once and Again with Winnie, we were writing scripts together, and she like totally took me under her wing, mentored me. She's incredible. But Savannah, her daughter, was a teenager at the time. And now Savannah is a writer on my show, Firefly Lane.
Oh, wow.
So, and she's like amazing. They're both just like such incredible writers. So,
Phenomenally talented.
yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so. What I love is that you had an agent that agented you.
yeah.
That said, "Hey, here's what you need to do,
Yeah.
and here's a good fit for you,"
Yeah.
which is what you imagine an agent's going to do.
Yes.
but doesn't always, I think, result. Which is why she's probably still your.
Yeah. She's
agent.
great. Nancy. Love
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when Once and Again went off the air, I jumped back over to Dawson's for the last year, which was great. So I was there for seasons 3, 4, and 6. I skipped a year in between. But anyway.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then you've gone on to make your own shows,
Yes.
and so
Yeah. And I've worked with your husband on one
Richard
of them.
Adam,
Yeah. That's
on
how
Witches
I
of
know you.
Easton.
Yeah.
it's such a
So
special show.
fun. Oh, we had the best time on that show. It was so great.
Before that show, Rich would be on a show, and Miracles, I hung out because I knew a lot of people on that show. But the rest of the shows, I'm like, I'm not going anywhere near those shows. No, I mean, they were perfectly fine
Right.
people. They were perfectly fine people, and they were perfectly fine stuff. But that felt like family.
It did.
It's such a warm, welcoming, and just fun. Like, just fun. Everybody on that show, and that's a testament to you.
Thanks.
And
I mean, I got lucky and I chose well. That group, we just clicked, and they're all so talented, but also really good people and just fun to hang out with.
Yeah.
We in that writer's room, we would laugh all day, every day. It was just a blast. And Richard, he's hilarious.
he is a bright, shiny star.
Yeah.
I like him.
Yeah.
Keep him around for a while. Anyway, but they did not know what they had with Witches of Easton.
Yeah. we were doing solid in the ratings. We thought we were going to come back for a third year. And so we wrote a massive cliffhanger for the last episode, and people are still mad about it. We sent one character to hell who was like a really beloved character. Yes. Two of the characters switched bodies. One had to go to prison. It was a whole thing. And so we thought we were coming back. We really believed it. And then we didn't, because I mean, part of it was the network was deciding to try to rebrand.
Yes.
And so we were not part of their rebrand.
And that happens so many times, and it never is anything about the show. It has to do with, that's.
I mean, and that cast. How incredible are that cast?
All like just, I don't know.
So good.
I love them all.
And they all got along so well, just like the writers did,
Yeah.
It was a really happy, harmonious place to work, which is
which is special.
It is special.
All right.
Anyway, enough about Witches of Easttown.
All right. Let's all go back to 1986 or the 90s when it was being rerun, whenever we picked up on Designing Women. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what we remember before we started rewatching of Designing Women.
I always remembered it, and I don't know how I glommed onto it or decided to start watching it. I just know that from the first episode, I was just completely hooked. And having rewatched it recently, we got one of Julia's famous speeches, orations, whatever you want to call them. As she very, very Julia-like, just put Ray Don in his place.
That's from the beginning. That
was in the pilot episode.
Yeah.
And I'd forgotten that was in the pilot because I remember the whole Ray Don of it all because of the way that she said it.
Yeah.
Said that name.
Thank you, Ray Don.
Exactly.
That was funny.
In the pilot.
Yeah, so I watched it from the beginning and loved it from the very first episode and enjoyed the different women. I always appreciated that they were different types of women. It was a cross section of a type of woman from Julia, who seemed to have everything all together, and you've got Delta Burke playing the former beauty queen, Mary Jo, the single mother, and Charlene, who just looks at the world through some kind of rose-colored glasses that maybe we all would like to put on from time to time. I love the show. I just loved it. I love the friendship between them.
And Maggie, do you remember the show? Because you're a little bit younger than us.
I do remember it. I did remember it. What I remember is a couple things. First of all, it was a little sophisticated for me at the time. It was a show.
You were reading some sophisticated material.
Yeah, so sophisticated. But I mean, at the time when that show was on, like I was deep in my like Family Ties, Cosby, that world. But my mom loved Designing Women, and I remember she also watched it a lot when it was in reruns on Lifetime. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I feel like it was Lifetime. I could be wrong, but there was a network, a channel that would play it all the time.
Yeah. No, this had to have been Lifetime.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
The things that I remembered, because I've now watched a bunch of episodes, to prepare for this, and things that I had remembered before I watched them were the night the lights went out in Georgia's speech, which was in the second episode. I couldn't believe. I remembered always that Julia would give a fiery speech and take somebody down a couple notches who needed to be taken down a couple notches.
Yes.
And I remembered the Anita Hill episode. And I remembered the T-shirts that they had on. He did it and she lied T-shirts.
Yeah.
That was one of my strongest memories. And also, obviously, their accents, which are so musical and fun. And, when the more you hear them, the more you want to start talking like that. And I also remembered The Staircase.
Oh.
That is a show that has very particular production design and a lot of staircases. I don't know if you noticed that. The staircase in the Sugarbaker house.
Yes.
And then also that insane circular one at
the governor's mansion.
No, at Suzanne's house.
At Suzanne's house.
She has a beautiful staircase. And then I didn't even remember that there was a whole staircase episode at the governor's mansion. But staircases are a theme in that show.
And that felt like clearly a little nod to the Southern architecture since they were in interior design.
Yeah.
And, I was I grew up in the South. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. So I do remember the show being set in Atlanta. Like that's one of the, I was like, whoa. And I always liked the idea of designing women. And I remember in general, like I loved the actresses, but I was at USC. I was in college at film school when the show came on. And so I only caught it sporadically. Like I didn't recognize it as a feminist show to me. Because I wasn't necessarily, I was only catching kind of the surface of it when it first came out, and the Delta Burke being such a hot topic very quickly. I remember that. And that felt like the forefront of that show. And even though, it felt funny and smart, the big hair and the southernness of it was actually something that I was in at that time. I'd left the South. I had, I was sort of like a little bit like, is that really? I don't know how I feel about that. But in revisiting it, I realized like I should have paid more attention to it.
Did it ring true to you at the time of people that you knew? Or did it feel like a caricature?
It felt like a little bit of both. But it was about a world that was not my South. Because I was from a little bit of the suburban South, the suburb of Atlanta. And I didn't know an interior designer in my life in the South. So it was of the still genteel, like they were kind of riding the line of wanting both, of wanting to sort of honor that genteel Southern magazine South, and yet also being feminist and forward and liberal, the new South that was happening too. And that was a conflict in the South that was happening. Because I wasn't I really was like just not interested in that part of the South. So it was never part of like, oh yeah, the big hair and the big thing and whatever. That always felt separate from me. And so I think there was a part of me that sort of was like, I don't trust this show to a degree. And, but looking back at it, I wish I had appreciated it more, but I don't think I caught it. Like I just didn't watch it for 2 years because I was still doing film school, and that was very all encompassing. So I sort of would catch it sporadically. Yeah. So it's interesting to me because I'm like, this show is awesome and bonkers.
It is bonkers and awesome and very unabashedly feminist. And that's in the height of like some real backlash that was happening. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And unabashedly political and unabashedly topical. And you're like, how did this episode get on the
That
air?
Anita Hill episode, I just rewatched it because I had remembered it. The one thing I didn't remember was that they had 2 new cast members.
I did not remember that. And I did not remember that they showed so much of the footage.
I mean, it was as a time capsule. That episode is amazing. And I thought it was really powerful.
Well, and then there's the AIDS episode.
With Tony Goldwyn.
Yes, from the first season, I believe.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to give some listeners some context to this. So the Anita Hill episode is from season 6.
Yeah.
Episode 8, I believe. And it really does take on, the women are on different sides of the story for what was happening between Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, and the congressional hearings around that, and the congressional vote of whether they were going to move forward his nomination to the Supreme Court. And that, again, was capturing I remember not only bits of that episode, I don't remember the t-shirts. That was funny that you remember the t-shirts. But that 90s time with Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas was one of the things that radicalized me in the 90s, and all of us. It riveted the nation. So Anita Hill kind of left without a lot of support. And then she got back to her office, and she had all these letters from women all over the country saying, that's my experience. I believe you. I know what you're talking about. In the moment, it was a huge tragedy to a lot of women. But the aftermath was that literally sexual harassment laws got changed and processes got changed because of that moment in history. And women started running for office. And it changed a lot of things because it felt like such a
Travesty?
Travesty. Yes. Yeah, it really did. It felt like a complete travesty. And now we know it really was a complete travesty.
Well, it's funny as I'm sure I watched this episode when it aired, but I honestly didn't remember it. And I wonder if it's because I just blocked it out of my mind because I just thought and still believe the whole thing was a travesty, as I said. And it still ticks me off to no end to this day that was allowed to happen, that we still have Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court.
And we did it again.
Yeah.
I know.
And we
with
did
Brett
it
Kavanaugh.
almost worse.
Yeah.
It feels like an incredible pushback against women moving forward
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and equality. And that was the thing that struck me so much about Designing Women. It was speaking to the time,
right.
and it's so resonant now. Almost like so many episodes were incredibly resonant.
In a depressing way.
In a
that
depressing-
AR-15.
That gun control.
Yes.
Like you're like, come on.
Right.
That was 1987.
And the speech that she gave was amazing about like that's what those guns are for, and we're still in that.
And literally,
and
you
it's
could pull
gotten
that
a million
speech-
times worse.
that you could pull that speech out now and it would
Yeah.
literally be the same speech.
I know.
The story is that Suzanne, who has a pet pig, which I had forgotten, and it's not a small pig. It's not the cute little celebrity pigs that were
Not
happening.
a little pygmy pig.
Yeah. But Suzanne buys an AR-15.
Yeah.
Season 3, episode 15, Full Moon. What's funny is because, again, the story of that to a certain degree is that Julia has accidentally mooned
Right.
the fashion show, the Atlanta fashion show, which she was asked to walk the catwalk for.
Right.
And it was such a proud moment until she had, her dress got tucked into her pantyhose and she was not wearing underwear because they had told her not to for the panty line. And so she moons the entire show.
And they bring it up multiple times in other episodes too, which is pretty funny.
I do love that. Sparkly dialogue,
Yes.
super funny concepts,
Yes.
a lot of slapstick,
Yes.
and yet also incredibly topical, incredibly personal, incredibly like, this is a Linda Bloodworth-Thomason show.
And apparently she wrote all the episodes. Is that true?
She wrote a lot of them. I don't know that she wrote all of them because I
No?
think there's a couple of names, but she wrote a significant portion of them.
Well, I seem to remember hearing that one of the reasons that she wrote the show and set it in Georgia was because she wanted to change the image of women in the South. And I think that was one of the things when I watched it as it aired originally that I did come away with thinking that, okay, because I didn't live in the South or growing up, although both my parents are from New Orleans. And there were still a lot of stereotypes about women in the South. And here you have these educated, erudite, really kick-ass women who are living in Georgia doing their own thing. And I think at least for me anyway, it made me go, okay, you have to remember not everybody's the same everywhere you go, as we all should know and should remember. I mean, this show would never get on the air today. Tackling similar subjects, tackling.
Well, and talk about so apparently Linda Bloodworth-Thomas's mother died of AIDS from a blood transfusion
What?
in November of 1986. And so I'm trying to see when the episode,
The Tony Goldwyn one.
the Tony Goldwyn, which was at season 2, episode 4, Killing All the Right People. And that they're not only talking about AIDS in that episode, and it really also feels like that show was also imparting information,
Yes.
which felt so vital and important for that time. And Rich and I were just talking last night about the AIDS epidemic and that time and growing up in that time and coming of age in that time and losing people or knowing people that were lost. And it being such a sort of scary time, it being not, a completely different disease than COVID, but there's that moment where we're like, wow, we've never gone through this. And you're like, well, we've gone through some things.
There was a lot of misinformation in the 80s about AIDS too. And I remember, I was a kid at the time, but I remember there being a theory that like a mosquito bite could give you AIDS, like that kind of thing.
And it gave a lot of people license to be as anti-gay as
Yes.
they wanted to be and be upfront about it because of all the misinformation and their choice not to pay attention to the information that was out there about what
Right.
it was and what it wasn't.
Yeah.
So it's killing all these people, killing all the right people because they are
Right.
misbehaving.
because
and-
they're sinners.
Exactly.
And that episode aired October 5th, 1987. So like a year after her mom died, which it felt like such a personal show, which is such an interesting thing to come from a network sitcom
Yeah.
in the 80s. Her mother-in-law also during the run of the show died of breast cancer.
And that was,
And there was
that's-
that breast cancer
and
episode
this is the breast
with
cancer
Charlene. Yeah.
and there was a card at the end of the dedicating it to two women, and one of them must have been her mother-in-law.
And I'm wondering, and the other one must have been her mother.
And that episode, the Killing All the Right People episode, was also the one where Mary Jo stepped up at school
Yes,
and made a case for
Right.
for talking to kids about sex and condoms because she didn't want her daughter to die,
Yeah.
needlessly because nobody would tell her. She didn't have the right information.
Right.
Again, I just it's really one of the recurring themes that we've had, I think, in this podcast as we look back on the shows we've talked about is just how much and how upfront a lot of these shows were at that time in ways that they could not be today. I mean, that episode, I don't know that any network would want to touch an episode where you actually have somebody talking about in positive terms about sex education for teenagers. I think that would be a really tough thing for them to do.
Having those arguments, like I think we talk about more things in more sophisticated ways on television now, but it is stunning how unchanged the arguments seem to be,
Yeah.
and that there's still this very huge divide about who has rights and who has autonomy and who also gets to be vulnerable and who gets to live and who has the right to live fully and completely the way they want to without judgment. And that is really, So one of the other kind of big episodes for me was season 2, episode 20, How Great Thou Art, which is about Charlene. And by the way, I love that she's called Charlene instead of Charlene, the way that it's spelled. That does feel like a real Southern thing. But Charlene basically decides to leave her church because her pastor says that women can't be pastors, can't be priests.
I think I didn't watch that one. I think I missed that one.
And at the end, Julia gets to sing in the choir and gets to sing this beautiful How Great Thou Art. And so she's been practicing. She really wants to do this solo, but she's nervous and then is like, I can't do the solo. And then decides, well, I'm not going to do it because you're leaving this church. And Charlene says, no, I want you to do it because you should take that and own that song for women in the church. And it's really, really incredibly beautiful. And this is going to lead me to my Dixie Carter behind the scenes story that I heard about this, so Dixie Carter was a Republican. She was conservative and she was doing these rants that were very liberal.
You're blowing my mind right now.
I know. And what I read is that she basically said, I'll do these rants, but for every big rant, I get to sing in a later episode.
The first part I knew, but not the second part. That's great. Good for her. That's great.
So they both got what they wanted out of it.
As we're talking about all these issue-oriented episodes, it is also still just flat out funny, this show. Just absolutely hilarious. And at the end of the day, of course, that's what we all want when we're watching. At least that's what I want when I watch a comedy. I want it to make me laugh. And it definitely did. Just so many moments and issues. And it's such a great show. I love it so much.
Yeah. The dialogue is like sparkling. It is like play dialogue. It is
Yeah,
just every episode is like a little play, right?
Very much so.
And a really fun play. And then you have these rants, but you also have such broad physical comedy going on. in
Very
here.
Lucy and Ethel, a lot of the stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the perfect thing. It is wacky adventures with the
getting your
with the
head
gals.
stuck in a banister, being when they were stuck under the bed.
Stuck under the bed. That was
insane.
That was insane, and it was so fun, and it was very, very goofy, and that's what I love. I think particularly in the later seasons, it became clear that Julia married Joe.
Yeah,
that Annie Potts and Dixie Carter were just going to town. Like, which episode had them playing Betty Davis?
Right, that was the Anita Hill episode.
Yeah,
that was the Anita Hill.
Yes.
Which was, that episode is so bonkers. That's what I'm saying.
Bonkers.
It's bonkers because that is so funny. It is hilarious that it's making the comment of like, you look like a crazy person when you try to speak out for women's rights because she's dressed up as Betty Davis from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
No, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. One of the crazy lady movies. And so it's, that I really.
And she gives a rant on the news.
On the news with her Baby Jane makeup
about
on.
why she's a feminist and
just the two of them driving around dressed up as Faye Dunaway and Betty Davis in the car. Again, just really physical.
Not
and
Faye Dunaway, though.
Joan Crawford.
Faye
God.
Dunaway played her later in Mommy Dearest.
That's it.
Yes.
Okay. Joan Crawford. Thank you. So Joan Crawford.
And they made a hanger joke in that episode.
Hanger jokes in that episode.
Yeah.
Because you're like, but there's so many layers to that. So it really did seem in the later seasons that it became clear that it was just put the two of them into the wackiest situations and go.
Yes.
All right, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and dive a little deeper and then talk some more about Maggie.
Fantastic.
And we're back.
My favorite episode is one that I think combines both the funny and the issues, if you will. It's called Reservations for 8. It's season 2, episode 22. And all 4 of our ladies and their significant others go away for the weekend for a ski weekend, and they're stuck in their cabin because the weather is too bad for them to go out and ski. And they have a knockdown discussion about men and women. And it is fantastic. Fantastic. It's the episode I tend to think about whenever I think about this show. Because you've got 4 different couples in different stages of the relationship. Charlene and Bill, her fiance, and then she eventually marries. They're all in love. On the show. And they're all in love, and they're just sitting over in the corner, really not paying attention to what everybody else is talking about. Julian Reese, played by Dixie Carter, and her real-life husband, Hal Holbrook. You've got Delta Burke and Gerald McRaney, Gerald McRaney plays one of Suzanne's ex-husbands. And then you've got Mary Jo and her current boyfriend, JD, who are also dating. And it's just lovely as they're talking about the war between the sexes, as it was often called at that time, about what women want, what men want, how they see each other differently. And it's pointed, but it's also really hilarious. I just love that episode so much. And recently I was talking to my mother as we were talking about us starting to talk about designing women on this podcast. And my mother said, "Oh yeah, I've got that recorded and saved." I said, "So do I." That episode. Because I want to have it nearby if I decide I want to watch it someday, if I just need something that makes me laugh.
That's so sweet. And what we were just talking about over the break was that in Designing Women, Dixie Carter and Hal Holbrook were married, and they play a couple on the show for several seasons. And then Jean Smart met her husband on the show, who was playing Annie Potts' boyfriend, J.D. Shackelford. And his name is Richard Gilliland.
I can never remember exactly how to pronounce it, but that sounds right.
Gilliland is how it looks. And he just recently passed. We're losing a lot of people. But that is really funny that she met her husband on the show playing the boyfriend of another character. Mm-hmm. And then when Gerald McRaney and Delta Burke were a couple, were they married at that point?
I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think they got married during the run of the show.
But whether they were married when that episode aired,
the episode aired.
I'm not sure. But let's see if we can find out.
And they're still married.
Yeah,
I
still
believe.
married.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the episodes we haven't talked about yet was They Shoot
Right.
Fat Women, Don't They?
By the way, that's the thing I also remember most about the show from back then was all of the public scrutiny about Delta Burke's weight and how much flack she took from comedians and, people just made fun of her nonstop. It was terrible.
And here's the horrifying thing about watching that show and that episode. She's not that fat.
No.
She's not fat.
No.
She's bigger than she was when she started the show.
I think that there's something about her having been a beauty queen. It's like if she doesn't maintain a 24-inch waist forever, then, she's offending. I don't know. It's
that I remember the talk about that episode.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the talk about her weight of that time. And I found an article about it from the LA Times. Bloodworth-Thomason said she avoided writing about Burke's weight because she thought Burke would want it that way. Finally, however, the attacks out there had gotten so vulgar and tacky, we decided it was time to deal with the issue. Some of the insults Suzanne's classmates, so Suzanne has to go to a high school reunion.
Right.
And people insult her about her weight when she goes back. Some insults Suzanne classmates offer are culled from real life. For example, at a press event, Burke overheard reporters trying to guess her bra size, which happens in the reunion.
Yeah, I remember that. But her character is often not self-aware at all. And that was a great moment of self-awareness and like self-acceptance. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. So once again, I think it's so interesting that they're writing to the actresses on the show in this show, that they're clearly writing to things that are important to Linda Bloodworth-Thomason, and they're writing to the times. There's a tie between Maude and All in the Family and this show, as well as like workplace comedies like Taxi or, and Golden Girls, which,
it feels like they're probably not on purpose, but the women in the Golden Girls, do you notice that like B. Arthur is Julia Sugarbaker and Charlene is Rose, and like they're similar in a lot of ways.
It's a trope, and we learned some of this. We did it. We did an episode on It's a Living.
I loved that show growing up.
And Drew Greenberg and Jane Espenson talked about the female friendship trope of four women. There's the sweet, naive girl, the tomboyish one, the sexy one, and the kind of leader, the matriarch, the smart one, sort of the mom one. And they're like, you can look at almost any female show and you can break the characters down in that way often.
Yeah. And Jillian was the sexy one on It's Living. And the redhead, I can't remember her name. She was the leader.
She was the leader, the smart one, the kind of like in charge.
Oh my God. I think about that show every time I'm in downtown LA and I see that building.
The Bonaventure.
And I start singing the theme song, What a fun show that was.
And every season it sort of came back with a slightly different cast.
Yes, I remember that.
And stuff, which this show did too. So it was 5 seasons with the original cast. And then in season 6, Delta Burke leaves, kind of famously, apparently maybe a little bit of a she's fired or she's not fired or she wanted more money and doesn't get more money because I think the contracts went for 5 years, and so she wanted more money because she was a breakout star, even though they were all kind of breakout stars of that show. But she leaves, as well as Jean Smart.
Yeah.
And so they bring on
Jan Hooks
and
Julia Duffy
from Newhart.
Oh yeah, I remember. Wasn't she? She was with Peter Scolari on
Yes,
that
she
show.
was. Yes, they played yuppies.
Yes. I loved them. I loved Peter Scolari.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
But the first show I ever saw filmed, I came out to go to USC in 1984, and the friends we knew that lived out here in Orange County were like, we're going to go see a taping of a show, and we went to see Newhart
That's so
show.
cool.
And Peter Scolari was in the cast and came up and talked to people afterwards. And I stayed to talk to him.
Nice.
Because I was like, and it was just so amazing. Like, it was in one of those amazing, like, oh my God, my whole life in LA is going to be like this, seeing stars, being on studio,
Chatting it up.
And it's just going to be, this is going to be every day for the rest of my life. It was not, but that moment in time, I got to have that beautiful moment, and he was very sweet.
I actually went to a taping of Designing Women.
No
You
way.
did?
Yeah.
Way to bury the lead.
Yeah.
Well, because I can't remember which episode it was. I do believe, though, that it was during the end of the 5th season, because in the back of my mind, there were all these stories swirling about Delta Burke leaving the show. Is she leaving the show? Is she not leaving the show? But I don't remember which episode it was.
What do you remember?
I remember the set. I remember, I think Delta Burke was wearing this blue suit dress. I don't remember, but I remember nothing specific about what the episode was about. If there was a guest star, who was the guest star. I just know that I went, which drives me absolutely crazy that I can't remember any more than that. Someday, hopefully I'll remember. It'll come back to
I can't remember the episode of Newhart, but I remember every other moment of that night. The beautiful lot, my favorite lot in the world, which is in Studio City, is
CBS Radford?
CBS Radford.
My first job. Yeah, was at CBS Radford.
Well, so we're standing in line to go into the studio. This is my little like beautiful night, the whole beautiful night. And I'm like, oh, we're going to go see. We're sitting outside the studio. The studio's so cute. And this guy walks out of the studio, says goodbye to the guard, puts on a backpack and starts jogging down the street. And about midway through him putting on the backpack, I'm like, that's Mark Harmon.
No way.
From St. Elsewhere. Like the sexy one from St. Elsewhere. And
Pam Dauber's
nobody
husband.
Nobody else noticed. And I'm just watching him. And it's like me and my moment with Mark Harmon.
So cool.
It was so cool. And I'm like, again, my whole life is going to be like this. This is day 2 in LA. And then we walk in and we go see Newhart. I meet Peter Scolari. I'm like, every moment, right? Every hour, I'll be seeing someone. And then I stayed late and everybody else was bored because it took a long time watching the sitcoms be filmed. And so they were like, we'll meet you back in the car. So that by the time I left, nobody else was on the lot. There was no security. I walked out. I'm literally standing alone in this little lot. And I'm like, oh. And so I just start wandering around the lot.
You could have night at the museum.
I could have
gone into
at the
all the
museum
different studios.
I ended up on the steps of St. Eligius,
Nice.
the outdoor set of St. Elsewhere. And I'm like, I'm standing on the set of St. Elsewhere. I just met Peter Scolari. I just saw Mark Harmon. This will be my life. And then I walked back to the cars and then I got into a different life, which was fine and good and all that great stuff. But it was a very magical night. And I remember every moment of the night. I do not remember the episode that was filming.
Well, that was secondary to everything else that happened.
Right.
It was pretty secondary.
You were just thinking about Mark Harmon the whole time.
A little bit Mark Harmon until Peter Scolari walks out. He's more my, he's a little more my type. If you've met Richard Haddam, funny.
I can see
sweeter,
that. Yeah,
sweeter
yeah.
more than like sexy. I mean, listen, who doesn't like to
What
look
did
at
you
Mark
just say?
Harmon?
You got to edit that out.
Kevin's like, got it.
Equally sexy, but not Mark Harmon. Not
Okay, again, I'm going to take the shovel out of your hand. Stop digging.
You're right. I'll stop now. But Peter Scolari's awesome. So is Richard Haddam.
Speaking of It's a Living and going to see sitcoms, the only sitcom I've ever been to a taping of was when I first started in film school. I went to see one of the very last tapings of the show Wings with Crystal Bernard, who was in she was one of the later casts of It's a Living.
Oh,
anyway,
that's right.
very random.
I loved Wings.
I did too.
Yeah, my sister was visiting me. I just, moved out here. And so we were like, we have to go see a sitcom taping. That was the one we went to.
I also went to 2 Murphy Brown tapings.
Oh, that's pretty cool, man.
The first one I don't remember. My mother was in town. We went together. The second one I absolutely remember because it was the baby shower for Murphy. And all these newswomen were guest stars on the show. And the reason I think I remembered is because during one of the breaks, they let some of the folks in the stands go to the restroom, and I'm standing in line, as you always do, at the women's room with Katie Couric.
Wow.
And
Diane Sawyer, was she there?
I don't
Barbara
remember if Diane
Walters?
Sawyer was there, but the female anchor on GMA.
Joan London?
Yes. And I'm just like you, I'm like, oh my God.
Everybody's here.
That's pretty cool.
I'm standing in the right line.
Yeah, so.
Speaking of Murphy Brown and, our other 80s boyfriend, Scott Bakula.
Oh, yeah.
He's in the show.
I couldn't believe it when I saw him. Oh my God.
And he's playing a real jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you guys invoked his name numerous times when you were talking about Remington Steele, and I don't remember why.
Well, you were probably telling a
Because of
story.
Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Robin and I both worked on Star Trek at the same time, even though we didn't meet each other.
Oh, how crazy.
Yeah. And of course, at any time, it's just Scott Bakula. He's come in a number of times.
Well, and and Murphy Brown, and
He's
He's a
awesome.
real 80s guy. He
Yeah.
would show up. Yeah. Melissa worked in camera for 20 years.
Oh, awesome.
In the pilot, he's Annie Potts's
Ex-husband.
ex-husband, but like Delta Burke starts dating
Right.
him. That's
Yes,
the pilot.
that's-
She
Very
goes to see
scandalous.
him as a gynecologist, and they end up dating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's even thinking that she's going to marry him, but then season 1, episode 1, gone.
And I don't think I ever got the feeling of Scott Bakula in that role of Mary Jo's ex-husband, of him being the cad that she described.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the Scott Bakula. It must have been him, but because they didn't spend a lot of time, I don't think, writing the character. It was just, we were just supposed to know he treated her badly, and she, we're not supposed to like him. And I remember thinking, even when I watched it, I don't know, he doesn't seem so bad.
Well,
He's so
trying to be
darn cute.
nice. Yeah. He's so darn cute, but not as cute as Richard Haddam. But, yeah, so he does a second episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he
He was in more than one episode that I watched recently.
He was in several.
The episode
it was the one where she's trying to date somebody.
She and JD are trying to finally have sex together.
And
Yes.
he shows up.
Yes.
Yeah, and then he's a little more. You're like, okay, this guy's being jerky.
Right. He's trying to like get in between their
Yeah.
relationship.
So Linda Bloodworth-Thomason, she had created Filthy Rich, the inheritors that all have to live in the house together to try to get the inheritance. It's called Filthy Rich.
Oh, I don't know that one.
And it was precursor to this, but it starred Dixie Carter and Delta Burke.
Oh.
So I do want to also talk about that in 1995, there was sort of a sequel to this show called Women of the House. It ran for a season, and Suzanne Sugarbaker goes to Congress when her husband passes away and she takes his seat.
Why don't I remember this?
I know.
Me either.
You're like,
And so Delta Burke came back and worked with.
her
Yeah.
again. It's about this woman in Congress who's, she's
Is
the
she
legally
playing
blonde.
Suzanne Sugarbaker?
She's playing Suzanne Sugarbaker. Her fifth husband has passed away. In Designing Women, she's had 3 husbands, I believe. All right. So any other episodes we've got to talk about? Okay, good. Because we're going to get back and talk about Maggie. Because I was reminding myself of Witch's Beast End, which we talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
Because there are 4 women on that show.
Yes. Oh my God. Do they fit into
they
the
fit?
tropes?
The sisters, Freya,
Yeah.
played by Jenna Dewan Tatum.
Well, no longer Tatum. Jenna
Jenna
Dewan.
Dewan, sorry.
Yes.
And Ingrid.
Ingrid, Rachel Boston. Yeah.
And their mom,
Yep.
Joanna,
Yep.
played by Julia Ormond.
Yeah. Of course. And Aunt Wendy,
Her
Machen
wild sister.
Amick. Yeah.
So talk about making that show. And
Yeah.
who did you make a 4 female?
Well,
trope?
you know what's funny is it's based on a book. And in the book, there's only 3 of them. And I invented the character of Aunt Wendy, partly because, which is the Machen Amick character. I wrote her into the pilot because I wanted to kill a character in the pilot to show that the world had that this show had real life and death danger to these witchy women and that their powers could do them harm. And so Machen was so good that we could not keep her dead. She had to come back to life in the second episode and become a regular character because she's just amazing. And the chemistry, I think that having the sort of the parent generation, the aunt and the mom, and then the younger generation playing off each other in different combinations, it just worked as like a family unit, I think. So, but originally it was 3. But, now that you're telling me about these tropes, I'm like, oh boy,
The sexy one.
The sexy one, which was well, it was a little bit of both Machen and Jenna, really, because Jenna was supposed to be sort of like a goddess of love. Although I guess the Julia Ormond character is definitely the leader. And I guess the sort of naive one would have been Ingrid, Rachel Boston.
Yeah.
But then what were the other 2 tropes? There was
The tomboyish one, which again, and they sort of can shift a little bit, right? So, because sometimes your tomboyish one is your naive one.
Yes, which I would say would be, I don't know if Rachel was tomboyish, but
she was less sexy.
Right. She literally like worked in a library.
Yeah. She was the nerdy one.
Yes.
The one that studied.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then we went and saw one of her past lives where, she was in some kind of crazy sex cult. So, but we won't talk about that right now. Anyway, yeah, I guess it kind of holds true. I was unaware at the time that I was writing it, but yeah.
Women are the leads on that show.
Yes. And they're the really powerful ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I always thought that witches for women are what superheroes are for men. Now, I know women also like superheroes and there are female superheroes. But for me growing up, like whenever I was sick home from school, there would be reruns playing on the TV all day. And, I loved the TV. And so Bewitched, it's before my time, but they would play it in the 80s. And I just was obsessed. And I wanted to be a witch.
I think we all wanted to be a witch because how cool is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do what you want, have what you want. Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's very powerful and very feminine at the same time.
So is Designing Women really feminist and is it progressive?
I think definitely.
For the time and now.
I think for both, actually. I'm not sure we've ever seen characters, especially like Julia Sugarbaker, or shows that will happily take on issues of the day. So I definitely think it is. And again, feminism is not one thing. It's across the board. Women of all types can be feminist. And I think they all were in their own way. So yeah, I think it definitely is.
Yeah, I'm going to say I think the show was feminist for its time for sure. Progressive, yes, in terms of the topicality. And we didn't really talk about Anthony that much as a character on the show. The Black character on the show in the South, one Black character, but who becomes more and more part of that family and gets his own stories over the course of the seasons. And so I would say that it didn't have a huge diverse representation.
But even with Anthony, they didn't shy away from any
They
of
didn't
those
shy away
issues.
from talking about it.
Right.
Again, and yet very gently comparatively to the other stuff. It was side stuff.
But it wasn't about him. The show was about the Designing Women, not the unfortunately incarcerated delivery guy.
Meshach Taylor.
Yes.
Who was fantastic and who gets to do more. He gets to sing later in later episodes and yeah.
And in the last season, in the opening, he's finally in the opening. I mean, he's at the piano with all 4 women and Ray Charles.
Oh, we didn't talk about the openings. So the openings, again, George on My Mind. And the first 5 seasons are instrumental versions of it.
Right. And I saw in the credits that it was Doc Severinsen.
With the trumpet and the horn version.
And for those that don't know, he was the band leader of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
And then seasons 2 and 3 are this sort of jazzy version. And so here's the weird thing. So on Amazon, I'm just going to shout out how poorly some of the Amazon seasons are. Season 3, many of the episodes have 30 seconds of tone and bars.
Shut up.
Really?
I watched it on Hulu. It was
So
not
did
like
I.
that. Yeah.
30 seconds of the slate.
Wow.
What?
That's kind of neat, though.
But
it's a little bit crazy when you're like, wait, what is
Yeah,
happening?
yeah, yeah,
and it
yeah.
goes on and on. I'm like, how long is this going
Yeah.
on? I took a video of it. I couldn't believe it.
I don't know if it was the original videotape or film or whatever they shot it on, or if it was the transfer to what we're watching on the streaming, but it just was not very crisp.
It was not very crisp. And it was apparently shot on film, at least the early seasons.
I feel like it could have. I've seen other things that are old like that
And
that
could be
look
sharper.
better. Yeah.
So there's a DVD release too.
I bet it looks better on DVD.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by those openings, but I really love the opening of season 6, which is Ray Charles playing the piano
Incredible.
and all of them standing around the piano while he sings George on My Mind. And
They're all
it's-
in like evening
they all
gowns and
look
Anthony's
fabulous.
in a tuxedo and it's very cool.
That one's really great.
Yeah.
I really was like, that's great.
And why did it take 6 seasons for them to do that?
I don't know.
That, I don't know.
Maybe they were trying to like spruce it up because they had the new cast. So they
Oh,
wanted
could
to
be.
say like, hey, we're still like really cool and awesome.
Well, and we didn't also talk about the cast changes again for season 7. Julia Duffy leaves, and who comes in for her? Judith Ivey
Oh.
Right.
for
Oh,
season
gosh.
6.
Yeah. Seasons.
7. Season 7,
seven?
sorry.
Yeah.
I love Judith Ivey.
I do too.
Yeah. I love Julia Duffy.
Yeah.
But those characters really do, it's hard for them not to feel secondary.
Mhm.
And one of them is called Carlene.
Yes. Because she's supposed to be Charlene's sister.
because
I mean-
all of Charlene's sisters' names they're a variation of that. Carlene,
Yeah.
Darlene,
Jan Hooks.
Marlene.
Jan Hooks is
Yeah,
Charlene.
she's hilarious.
She's very funny.
Yeah.
I just like but at the same time, you're so missing
Yeah. It's not the same.
that really does feel like
Yeah.
all your best friends left.
It's not fair to Jan Hooks
No,
to have
no.
to step into those shoes.
No, not
It's
at
not
all.
fair.
Not at all. But all right, so we're back to you. So your Netflix show.
Yeah.
Firefly
Firefly
Lane.
Lane. Yeah. And it's sort of apt for 80s TV ladies because a lot of it takes place in the 80s and they work in television.
I love that. That's right. It
Yes.
starts in the 70s, so kids.
Right. It takes place in multiple time periods. It's a nonlinear narrative, so we're telling all these different stories at once. But yeah, it's about these two girls who meet in the 70s when they're like 14 and they become best friends. And we follow their story in the 70s as they like navigate high school and coming of age. And then we also see them in the 80s. They're working in TV news, local news in Seattle. And then we see them in the 2000s when they're kind of in their 40s and dealing with what it's like to be in your 40s. And we do jump to the 90s in a few different episodes as well. But yeah, we there's a lot of 80s stuff in the show.
And they're working in television
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
and apart and stuff. So it
Yes.
stars Katherine Heigl and Sarah Chalk.
Yes.
Great show.
Thanks.
Love it. I
Thanks.
love the cast. I love.
They're so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did it come about?
Well, I had a meeting. My agent, Nancy, who I mentioned earlier, set me up on a meeting with this woman named Stephanie Germain, who had the book. And so I went to lunch with her and this was in 2018. She handed me the book and I had not read it, but I looked at the back. I read the little blurb on the back and I was like, oh, this sounds right up my alley. Because it reminded me of so many things that I love, so many stories that I've loved, and I love female friendship stories and coming of age. But I was also really interested in, because I'm in my 40s, what is it like to be in your 40s? And I really I loved the whole. Just all of that. I thought it was a really beautiful story. And so we went and pitched it to Netflix and they bought it. And so I wrote the pilot in 2018 and they picked it up. And then, we started the writer's room in 2019 and we made a season. We finished the first season. We finished shooting it in January of 2020, just before COVID. Like I remember there was like news about like, oh, there's this crazy thing happening, this
China.
virus. And then, and then so we made season 1 aired and they picked us up for a second season. And when I had pitched it, I pitched them 3 seasons. I knew where the story ended and how, what I wanted to tell. So they picked up a second season, and they picked us up for 10 episodes. And I kept having flashbacks to Witches of East End and how we didn't get to finish. And I was very worried that for whatever reason, we wouldn't get to tell the whole story. So I went to them and I said, could you just pick up seasons 2 and 3? Because I know exactly where the story ends. And they came back to me, Johnny Chu, who's my executive there, who's the best. He came back and he said, look, what if we just do a really long season 2? And so that's supersized and tells all the stories that you want to tell, and you get to the end. And I was like, sold, I'll do it. So we ended up, so now season 2, part 1 has the first 9 episodes of season 2. And then part 2 has the last 7 episodes. And the last 7 are, I think, our best ones. I'm very proud of the show, and it was really hard to make the 16 episodes of season 2. It was so challenging with the COVID, and there was an atmospheric river up in Vancouver when we were shooting. So anytime we had scenes set outside, the weather would not, cooperate. So we ended up having to. It was tough. But the actors are so amazing, and the writers, I love all the writers on the show. And we had a lot of fun, even though we had to have a Zoom writer's room, which is not ideal because you miss being like we are right now in a room talking to people. But it was, I can't complain. I love making the show, and I'm really proud of it. And I'm really happy that we got to end it on our own terms and choose how that the story is complete, which you don't. I've been on plenty of shows where you got your fingers crossed, like, oh, I hope we get to come back. We knew exactly what we were doing, and we got to kind of land that plane, which was awesome. So we made 16, and I still have, like, for whatever reason, the Facebook algorithm sends me things about people wanting to resurrect Witches of East End and people being mad that it ended the way it did. This was in 2014,
That show had a following.
It really did. Very passionate following. And so it just like pains me that we didn't get to finish that story. So I was not going to let that happen to me again.
Oh my God. It has been so great to have you on.
Thanks, guys. It was really fun.
Oh my God, we might have to have you back on. If we get Annie Potts, can we have you back on?
Oh my God, yes. And I made a show. Oh. Did I say this?
No,
while we were
say this. Yes, tell us about.
Okay, 15 years. Just real quick. 15 years ago, I did a pilot for the CW, and it was about a young witch living in New York. It was like Sex in the City, but she's a witch, and she's like, trying to figure out her life. It was sort of like a dramedy, but Annie Potts is in we made a pilot and it did not make it to air, sadly. But it was directed by Jim Frawley, who directed the pilot of Ally McBeal and also directed the Muppet movie. Hello. But it had Annie Potts playing the mom of the witch, and she could not have been like cooler, funnier, more delightful. I loved her. And it also had Justin Hartley, who's from This Is Us.
This Is Us.
Which is pretty cool. He was also very cool before he was big.
And who was your lead actress?
Oh, Lauren Bintner, she was great. It was a really, and actually that's the show on which I met Becky Hartman Edwards. We were paired up because I was sort of a little bit too much of a newbie to be the showrunner on my own. So they paired me up with this writer named Becky Hartman Edwards, who I'm still very good friends with. And she worked on Firefly Lane. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love when you sort of circle back around to the people.
Yes. Well, I tried to hire her on multiple shows and I couldn't get her after the one where we met. And then I finally was able to nab her, and she was a co-EP and a writer and, producer. She's fantastic.
Well, I'm sorry the television gods didn't let us see the show, because it sounds like it would have been great.
It was really fun. It was a fun show.
All right. Well, I can't wait for what you do next.
Thanks.
And I'm thoroughly enjoying Firefly Lane. We've been having a blast because I love the 70s stuff, right? Because
yeah, me too. That stuff is really fun. Yeah.
It's beautifully, beautifully done. And
Thank you.
Enjoy it immensely, and enjoy you. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks,
Really
guys.
appreciate it. Thank you. And now it's time for today's audiography. The Designing Women fan website can be found at designingwomenonline.com.
It's fantastic. And you can stream this show on Amazon Prime, also Hulu, Apple TV. So you can find this show pretty much everywhere. It's free on Pluto right now, but when we went to watch it on Pluto, there were only like select episodes available.
It doesn't have the entire series.
No.
So as we wrap up today's episode, thank you for listening to 80s TV Ladies. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all of them. Search 80s TV Ladies and tell your friends.
And speaking of friends, I want to shout out Chris Stashew and Chris and Mike White at Weirding Way Media, where you can find this podcast and theirs, the Culture Cast and the Projection Booth, along with many other very cool podcasts on the Weirding Way Media Network.
And shout out to our other podcasting friends, Forrest and Scott from Astonishing Legends, Angela Ross at SoCal Voices, Cynthia Bemis Abrams at Advanced TV Herstory, and Dana Carter at Hello, My Name is Dana. Check out their podcast too.
Be sure to tune in for our next episode where we continue our Designing Women discussion. We want to hear from you. What are your favorite Designing Women episodes? Tell us on the website or on social media.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward becoming amazing ladies of the 21st century.
And that's the night lights went out in Georgia.